My name is Judith. I was 37 years old the morning my family skipped my college graduation, and I remember thinking, standing in that parking lot in my cap and gown with my phone showing 0 new messages, that I should have seen it coming. I didn't cry. I want to say that up front, not because I'm proud of it, but because it matters to the story. I stood there in the May heat with the polyester gown sticking to my arms and I thought, okay. And then I walked inside and I found my seat and I graduated. Alone. The person sitting in the front row that day, the one my family didn't know about, the one whose presence changed everything, I'll get to that. But I need you to understand the before first. Because the front row only means something if you know what the empty seats meant, and the empty seats have a very long history. Before I go on, I want to stop for just a second and ask you something. Where are you right now? Are you somewhere quiet, maybe with the lights low, maybe with a cup of something warm going cold on the table next to you? I always think about that. The people on the other side of this, in their own houses, in their own lives. I want to ask you this. Have you ever worked for something, really worked? The kind of working that costs you sleep and weekends and the easy version of yourself. And had the people who were supposed to cheer the loudest not even show up. If you know that feeling, stay with me. This story is for you. And if this channel has ever given you something, a moment of feeling less alone, a story that sounded a little like yours, please subscribe. It genuinely keeps this going. Drop something in the comments too. I read every single one. Okay. Let me tell you about the Alderman family of Rockford, Illinois. We were 5. My parents, Gerald and Norma, my older brother Patrick, my younger sister Cindy, and me. Judith Ann Alderman, born 3rd, which in our family meant born into a very specific kind of invisibility. Not the dramatic invisibility of the child who is openly rejected, the quieter kind. The kind where you are present at every dinner table and somehow still not quite seen. My father worked in insurance. My mother did bookkeeping part-time from home and spent the rest of her time being Gerald's wife and Patrick's mother and Cindy's mother, and, in a much more distracted and occasional way, mine. I don't think she meant it. I've spent a lot of years being sure she didn't mean it. But the thing about being unmeant is that it accumulates the same way. Patrick was 7 years older than me. By the time I was forming real memories, he was already a teenager. Already the one my father talked to like a person. Already the one whose report card went on the refrigerator and stayed there. He was smart in a loud, confident way, good at math, good at sports, good at walking into rooms and taking them over without seeming to try. My father loved him the way men love sons who remind them of themselves. Cindy was 2 years younger than me. She was the baby, and she was small, and she had my mother's blonde hair, and a way of crying that made adults in a 50-foot radius immediately want to fix whatever was wrong. I don't hold it against her. She didn't choose it. But I watched, from very young, the way the family reorganized itself around Cindy's feelings in a way it never quite reorganized around mine. I was the middle, the quiet one, the one with the book. There was a teacher in 4th grade, Mrs. Acaffer, who wore her hair in elaborate braids and smelled like a particular kind of floral lotion I have never been able to identify since. Who told me I was a natural writer? She said it after I turned in a story about a girl who finds a door in the back of her closet that leads to a library that goes on forever. She kept me after class and said, "Judith, this is genuinely good. You should keep writing." I remember exactly where I was standing. By her desk, which had a small ceramic frog on it that I had been looking at for most of the year. The frog had a little crown. I don't know why I remember the crown. I kept writing. I kept it mostly to myself, in notebooks I stored under my mattress. Because I had learned early that bringing things into the open in our house meant submitting them for a kind of casual appraisal that usually ended with those things feeling smaller than when they started. My parents were not cruel about my writing. They were something harder to argue with. They were indifferent. "That's nice, Judith," my mother said once, when I showed her a story I was particularly proud of, a long one, 8 pages, that I had worked on for 2 weeks. She put it down on the counter and went back to whatever she was doing. 8 pages, 2 weeks. That's nice. The Christmas I was 11, Patrick was 18. just back from his first semester of college, walking around the house with this new largeness he'd acquired. This sense of having seen things, my parents gave him a leather jacket. Real leather, brown, with a zip collar. I remember how my father held it up, grinning, and how Patrick put it on, and how the whole room sort of lit up around him. Cindy got a doll set she'd been asking for since September and a necklace with her birthstone. I got a dictionary. Now, I want to be fair. I had mentioned, at some point, that I needed a new dictionary for school. I had mentioned it practically. So, in the sense of being given something I needed, it was not a failure. But I was 11, and it was Christmas, and my brother had a leather jacket, and my sister had a birthstone necklace, and I had a reference book. I took it upstairs and put it on my desk and looked at it for a while. Then I opened it to a random page and started reading. That's what I did with things that didn't fit anywhere. I turned them into something I could use. I tell you all of this not to build a case for pity. I really don't want pity. I'm telling you because what happened at my graduation, what my family decided that day, and what was waiting for me inside that auditorium, only makes sense if you know the soil it grew out of. The years of That's Nice, the Christmases, the refrigerator that had Patrick's honor roll certificates on it for a decade and never once had anything of mine. The thing about being the invisible child is that you develop a very particular skill. You learn to witness. You learn to watch things without being watched watching them. You learn to understand how people work, what they value, what they're afraid of, what they're performing for each other, because you have spent your entire childhood as the person nobody was performing for. You just got to see the machinery. That skill, it turns out, is not nothing. I graduated high school in 1999 with a 3.9 GPA. My parents came to that graduation. So did Patrick and Cindy. We went to dinner after at an Applebee's, and my mother said I'd done a good job, and my father said I should start thinking seriously about a practical major. And Patrick told a long story about something that had happened to him at work that I don't remember at all, and that was that. The plan, my parents' plan. The one that had been quietly assumed for as long as I'd been old enough to have a plan assigned to me, was that I would go to the local community college for 2 years and then transfer somewhere nearby and study something sensible. Education, maybe, or business administration. I applied to Northwestern. I didn't tell anyone until I got in. My mother's reaction when I showed her the letter was a silence that lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. Then, "That's very expensive, Judith." "I know, I'm applying for financial aid." "And I'll work." "Patrick went to U of I," she said, as if that were relevant, as if what Patrick had done was the established family template. I know where Patrick went. My father's reaction was more direct. "We can't help you pay for that," he said. Not "congratulations," not "that's a good school." Just the financial position, stated plainly as though it settled the question. "I'm not asking you to," I said. They looked at each other. That look, the one parents exchange when a child does something they weren't expecting, and they're not sure if it's a problem yet. I had seen that look my whole life directed at Patrick and Cindy. For various reasons. It was the first time I remember seeing it directed at me. I went to Northwestern. I worked 20 hours a week my entire undergraduate career. I had a financial aid package and 2 part-time jobs. One at the campus library, and one waitressing at a diner on Davis Street that smelled like syrup and industrial cleaner, and where I made, on a good Saturday, enough in tips to cover a week of groceries. I studied English, I wrote. My parents visited once, freshman year, October. They drove up, walked around the campus in a way that felt more disorienting than proud. My father kept mentioning the tuition, the way some people mention the weather, just to fill the silence. And we had lunch at a Thai restaurant where my mother ordered the most American thing on the menu and spent most of the meal looking like she was waiting for something to go wrong. They didn't visit again. I went home for holidays, Christmas, occasionally Thanksgiving. These visits had a texture I got used to, a kind of careful ordinariness. Everyone behaving as though the fact that I had gone somewhere different and wanted different things was a mild social awkwardness we were all too polite to name directly. Patrick, by then, had a good job in finance in Chicago, and a girlfriend named Brenda who laughed at everything he said. Cindy was in cosmetology school and had more opinions about hair than I had previously believed one person could hold. I was studying Virginia Woolf and working on a novel I would eventually abandon and learning, in the very specific way that college teaches you if you let it, who I actually was. And here's the thing, and this is the part that I keep coming back to, the part that still surprises me when I sit with it: I was happy. Not performing happy, not pretending. Actually happy. Not because my family had come around, or because I had resolved anything, but because I had found the place where the thing inside me that had been pressing against its container since 4th grade, since Mrs. Aucaffer and the ceramic frog with the crown, finally had room. That's not a small thing. That's everything. I graduated in May of 2003 with a BA in English and a concentration in creative writing and a GPA of 3.8. I'd been awarded a small departmental prize for a collection of short stories I'd written senior year. My name was in the program under the prize. My name was going to be called in the auditorium. I told my family in March, gave them 2 months. I sent my mother a card with the date and time and the parking information and a note that said I would love for them to be there. My mother called to say they'd try. Try, that word. I've thought about that word many times since. 2 weeks before graduation, I called to confirm. We'll see, my mother said. Your father's back has been bothering him. It's a 3-hour drive, I said. I can look into hotels if. We'll see, Judith. I know what you might be thinking, I know. And you're right that I should have known. Some part of me did know. But there's another part. The part that has spent its whole life hoping that this time, this particular moment, will be the one that matters enough. And that part doesn't give up easily. That part drove to the ceremony parking lot on a Saturday morning in May and stood in the heat in a rented cap and gown and checked her phone. 0 messages. Not a call. Not a text. Not even, and this is the one I sat with longest afterward, not even a "we're sorry we can't make it." Nothing, just absence. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes. The parking lot smelled like hot asphalt and fresh-cut grass from somewhere nearby. A family was taking photos about 20 feet away, parents, a grandmother with a corsage, a little brother who kept running in circles while the graduate tried to pose. The mother was crying already. The grandmother kept touching the graduate's face. I watched them for a moment, then I turned around and walked into the auditorium. Have you ever been in a room full of people experiencing something enormous and felt like you were watching it through glass? That's what the first few minutes were like. Finding my seat in the alphabetical row. The woman next to me, alderman before Aldrich, kept leaning over to point her family out in the crowd. Her parents, her aunt, her boyfriend. Is your family here? She asked. No, I said. She gave me the look people give you when they don't know what to do with a true answer to a question they ask socially. Oh, I'm sorry. It's okay, I said, and then, because I needed it to be true, really. The ceremony started. The dean spoke. Someone read a poem, then they began calling names. I was watching the stage, waiting for mine when I saw him. Front row, center section, aisle seat. 62 years old, in a good gray suit with a small Northwestern pin on the lapel that I recognized because I had given it to him. Silver hair, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a printed copy of the program in one hand. Professor William Hartley, my thesis advisor. The person who had read every draft of my senior collection. Who had told me, the previous November, sitting in his office with the radiator clanking and the late afternoon light going orange across his desk, that I was the most naturally gifted writer he had taught in 30 years at this institution, and that I should under no circumstances let anyone, family, circumstance, fear, or time convince me that this was not worth pursuing. I hadn't known he was coming, he hadn't told me. I found out later that he had arranged it with the department, had specifically asked to be seated in the front row for the ceremony, had cleared his Saturday, had driven in from Evanston. He had not mentioned it to me because, he said afterward, he hadn't wanted me to feel the difference if my family came. He just wanted to make sure that, when my name was called, someone who understood the full weight of what that name meant was in the room. When they called my name, Judith Ann Alderman, Bachelor of Arts, English, Creative Writing. Recipient of the Catharine Ann Porter Departmental Prize. And I walked across that stage and shook the dean's hand and took the folder and turned to face the room. I found his face in the crowd. He started clapping, not just politely, really clapping. And I didn't cry on the stage. I saved it. I always save it. But I saw him, and he saw me. And in that particular moment, with the sun coming through the high windows of that auditorium at the angle that made everything look like it was gilded, I understood something I have never been able to fully put into words, but will try. Some people leave, and some people show up. And the ones who show up without being asked, the ones who calculate the parking and clear the Saturday and drive in from Evanston with a program they've already highlighted, those are the people who are actually your family. Whatever the biology says, I'm getting ahead of myself a little. Let me keep going. After the ceremony, Professor Hartley took me to lunch at a restaurant near campus, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a wine list. Somewhere I'd walked past for 4 years, without going in because the prices were outside my waitress tip budget. He ordered a bottle of something I didn't recognize and raised his glass and said, "To Judith Alderman, who is going to be red." I laughed. "You don't know that. I've been doing this for 30 years, he said. "I know." We sat there for 3 hours. He asked me about the novel I'd abandoned junior year, and why I'd abandoned it, and whether I'd considered going back. He asked about my plans. I had applied to 2 MFA programs, hadn't heard back yet, was terrified. He listened the way a person listens when they are actually interested, not waiting for their turn. He told me about his own beginning, which I hadn't known, that he'd grown up in rural Kentucky, that his parents had wanted him to take over the family farm, that he'd gotten into Columbia on a scholarship and told his father by letter because he hadn't been able to do it in person. He didn't speak to me for 2 years, he said, turning his wine glass slowly on the tablecloth. And then one day he called, and we never talked about it again. I don't know if that was grace or just the way time works. I've never been sure. I thought about that for a long time. My phone rang during lunch, my mother. I looked at the screen for a moment, then put it face down on the table. "Family?" Professor Hartley asked. "My mother," I said. He didn't say anything. He just refilled my glass. I called her back that evening, from my apartment, the small one on Orrington I'd shared with a rotating cast of roommates for 4 years. Standing in the kitchen with the window open and the spring air coming in. "We're sorry we couldn't make it," she said. "Your father's back." "It's okay, Mom," I said. "How was it?" "It was good," I said. "It was really good." And that was true. It was the truest thing I said in that phone call. I was accepted to the MFA program at the University of Michigan that June, full funding, teaching fellowship. I called Professor Hartley first. He made a sound I'd never heard from him before, a kind of genuine, unguarded delight, and said, "I knew it," 3 times in a row. I called my parents second. My mother said that's wonderful in a tone that suggested she wasn't entirely sure it was. My father asked if there was funding. I told him yes, full funding, stipend included. "Good," he said. "Good," Patrick sent a text. "Cool, congrats." Cindy sent nothing. I drove to Ann Arbor in August with everything I owned in the back of a 10-year-old Honda Civic I'd bought for $3,200 cash from a guy in Evanston who'd advertised it on a bulletin board at the library. The back seat had a tear in the upholstery that I covered with a bandana. The radio only got AM. I drove the 4 hours listening to a baseball game I had no investment in, just for the company of voices. The apartment I'd rented was on the 3rd floor of a building on South University, a studio with one window that faced east and got morning light, which felt, in some way I couldn't entirely explain, like a small sign. I unloaded the car in 2 trips. I put my books on the windowsill because I didn't have shelves yet. I bought a plant, a small succulent from a gas station, which I now realize was probably the most optimistic thing I have ever done. I sat on the floor of that empty apartment in the evening light and thought, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. The MFA was 2 years of the most sustained creative work I'd ever done. I wrote badly often. I wrote well occasionally. I had a workshop group of 7 people who became, 3 of them, anyway, among my closest friends. There was Marcus, who wrote surreal fiction with this incredible dark humor, and who always brought food to workshop, because he believed strongly that criticism was better received on a full stomach. There was Lynn, who wrote spare, devastating stories about her grandmother's immigration, and who was the most precise reader I have ever encountered. And there was Petra, who wrote essays so honest they were physically uncomfortable to read, and who had a laugh that could reorganize a room. These people. I keep coming back to this, and I can't do it justice. To have people who read your work and take it seriously and push back on it and care whether it's as good as it could be. If you've had that, you know what I mean. If you haven't, I hope you find it. My second year, I finished a novel. Not the abandoned one from undergrad, a new one, something I'd started the previous winter. About a woman returning to her hometown after 20 years and finding everything she'd believed about her family was constructed. I know. I will say that the autobiographical elements are structural rather than literal. Mostly, I sent it to Professor Hartley. He read it in 3 days and called me on a Sunday morning. I was still in bed, the succulent on the windowsill, Ann Arbor gray and cold outside, and said, "This is a real book, Judith. This is a real, publishable book. You're biased," I said. "I am," he said. "I'm also right." He put me in touch with his literary agent. Her name was Clara Voss. She was based in New York. She had a reputation for taking her time and being selective and selling the things she took on. She read my manuscript in 6 weeks. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon when I was eating leftovers at my kitchen counter and offered to represent me. I put the phone down after the call and sat very still for a long time. The succulent was doing fine, for what it's worth. This is the part where I want to tell you that it happened fast after that. It didn't. It happened the way most things happen when you're working at the level of genuine craft and not spectacle. Slowly, incrementally, with a lot of silence between the moments that mattered. Clara submitted my novel to publishers in the spring. There were rejections, 9 of them, over 8 months, each one a particular variation on "we loved it, but..." I kept a folder. Not to torture myself, just to have a record, 9 letters. Some of them were very kind. One of them, from an editor at a major house, said it was the most honest piece of fiction I've read this year, before explaining that they couldn't acquire it in the current market. The 10th submission was to a small but well-regarded independent press in Chicago. The editor was a woman named Sylvie Park. She called Clara in December, 3 days before Christmas. She wanted the book. The advance was not large. It was $18,000, split between signing and publication. I want to be honest about that because I've noticed that stories like this sometimes gloss over the financial reality of creative work, and I don't want to do that. $18,000. I cried anyway. I cried in a way I hadn't cried in years. The releasing kind, the kind that is made of relief and disbelief in roughly equal parts. I had just started a teaching position at a small liberal arts college in Ohio, an assistant professorship, 1-year contract. The kind of entry-level academic job that exists in a permanent state of precarity, but comes with health insurance and a salary that covered rent. I was 29, I had a book coming out, I had health insurance. I called Professor Hartley. He cried too, which he denied later. I called my parents on Christmas Eve. We were in the middle of what had become our annual careful ordinary holiday call. "How's the weather? How's Patrick? Did Cindy do something new with her hair?" When I said, as casually as I could, "Oh, I should mention, my novel is being published." A press in Chicago picked it up. "It's coming out in the fall." Silence. Then my mother said, "A novel? You wrote a novel?" "I've been writing it for 2 years, I mentioned it." "Well," she said. That's something." My father got on the phone. "Will you make money from it?" he asked. "Some," I said. "It's a first novel. It's about establishing." "Right," he said. "Well, good for you, good for you." I held the phone for a moment after we hung up. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the Ohio campus was empty, everyone gone home for the break. The streetlights were doing that thing they do in cold weather, casting orange circles in the dark. I made tea. I sat with it until it went cold. I thought about what good for you costs the person who says it and what it costs the person who receives it, and I decided that I was done waiting for something different. Not bitterly. Just finally, cleanly done. The book came out in October. The publication was not, and I want to be clear about this, an overnight sensation. It did not debut on any list. It was reviewed in 3 places in its first month: a small literary journal, a regional newspaper in Illinois, and a blog run by a woman in Portland who read exclusively fiction by women and had, at the time, about 4,000 followers. All 3 reviews were positive. The Portland blogger called it quietly devastating in the best possible way. I framed that one. What happened next was slow and then, suddenly, not slow. A larger review came in January, from a publications I had been reading since I was a graduate student, that described the novel as a masterwork of restraint. That review got passed around. The book started selling, not in enormous numbers in the hundreds, then the low thousands, but steadily, in a way that felt like actual readers finding it rather than marketing pushing it. By spring, it had sold 6,000 copies. By the following spring, 13,000. Sylvie called me the second spring to talk about paperback rights, and then to talk about a second book. Clara called the week after to tell me she'd had an inquiry from a film production company that had optioned 3 other novels from my press and was interested in discussing my book. I was 31, I was teaching, I was writing. I was, and I keep saying this because it keeps being the most important thing, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The Rockford Register-Star ran a piece on me in June of that second year. Small piece, features section, the kind of thing they run about local people who have done something the town can feel generally good about. Rockford natives' debut novel wins regional readers. There was a photo, my author photo from the book jacket, and a quote from me about the importance of place in fiction, which I'd given to a reporter over the phone, and which was accurate if slightly more polished than how I actually talk. My mother called me the day it ran. I saw the piece in the paper, she said. Oh, I said. Yeah, they reached out a few months ago. You look nice in the photo. I waited. Your father read the whole article, she said. He thought it was very good. I waited a little longer. We're proud of you, Judith. Her voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Not quite guilt, something adjacent to it, something that knew its own weight. Thank you, Mom, I said. We should have come to the graduation. There it was, 9 years later. But there it was, I sat with it, I turned it over. I thought about all the things I could have said, the 10 years of careful ordinary, the that's nice, the dictionary at Christmas, the 3-hour drive they hadn't made. I thought about the parking lot and the hot asphalt and 0 messages on my phone, and then I thought about a front row and a gray suit and someone clapping. I know, I said. It's okay, and I meant it. That's the part I need you to understand. I meant it not because it hadn't mattered. It had mattered enormously, but because I had built something in the space their absence left. And what I had built was mine, in a way that their presence couldn't have made more mine. You can't give someone what you already have. My mother started reading my books. She called me after she finished the first one, the long call, the one that went 2 hours in a way our phone calls never had, and told me, haltingly, that there was a character she recognized. She didn't say who the character was, she didn't have to. She was lonely, my mother said, the way you wrote her. I know, I said. I didn't know you felt that. I know you didn't. We sat in the silence of that for a moment. I'm sorry, she said, the first time, just like that, simply, without architecture around it. I know, Mom, I said. I know. Professor Hartley retired the year my second book came out. I flew to Evanston for the retirement dinner, a small faculty gathering at a restaurant near campus. 20 people who loved him in the particular way you love teachers, who changed something irreversible in you. He gave a short speech about what 30 years of teaching had taught him. And the last thing he said was that the greatest privilege of his career was watching writers find the full size of themselves. He looked at me when he said it. I kept it together until the parking lot. My second novel sold in a preempt, meaning the publisher made an offer before the submission process was complete for $210,000. I remember the exact moment Clara told me. I was in my car, in the parking lot of a grocery store in Columbus, where I'd moved for the second teaching position. I was holding a bag of apples in my lap because I'd grabbed them from the passenger seat when my phone rang and then just sat there, holding apples, while Clara told me the number. I said, "Say that again." She said it again. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes. The apples sat with me. I don't know why I'm telling you about the apples. I just remember them very clearly. My third book, which came out the year I turned 36, was a finalist for an award I cannot mention by name, but which you would recognize if I did. I did not win. I sat in a hotel ballroom in New York City in a dress I had bought specifically for the occasion, at a table with my editor and Clara and Petra and Marcus and Lynn, who had all flown in. And I did not win, and when the winner was announced, I clapped genuinely and turned to my table and said, "Okay, who's buying the first round?" Petra bought the first round. We closed the bar. It was one of the best nights of my life. The thing about the graduation, the empty seats, the zero messages, the hot asphalt, is that it could have broken something. In a different version of my life, in a version where I was a different person, or had different resources, or had not had misses. Ackhafer in 4th grade or Professor Hartley in the front row, it might have. It didn't break me. It clarified me. I know that sounds like something someone says after they've won, and maybe it is. I'm trying to be honest about the order of operations. I'm not sure I could have said it this simply while I was in the middle of it. While I was standing in the parking lot, or filing into the ceremony, or driving home from the unreturned call. In the middle of it, it just hurt, cleanly and completely and without any redemptive framing. The framing came later. The framing came from years of keeping going, of writing the next sentence and the sentence after that, of building something in the space that was mine. But I want to tell you something about Professor Hartley and the front row that I have never said out loud. When I saw him sitting there, gray suit, Northwestern pin, program in hand, I didn't think, "Look who came instead of my family." That's not what it felt like. It felt like, look who came because this mattered, not instead of, not in replacement of, because of what this was. He showed up for the work, for what the work meant. And because he showed up for the work, I understood, in a way I hadn't quite understood before that moment, that the work was real. That it deserved someone in the front row. That I deserved someone in the front row. That is not a small thing. I cannot overstate how not small that is. If you have had someone like that, a teacher, a mentor, a colleague, a friend who showed up without being asked, who witnessed something in you that you were still learning to witness in yourself, you know what I mean. And if you are that person for someone else, if you are the one who clears the Saturday and prints the program and drives in from Evanston, please know that it lasts. It really lasts. I am 37 years old. I have written 3 novels and am working on a 4th. My books are taught in classrooms. I live in a house in Columbus with more bookshelves than furniture, and a garden I am very sincerely terrible at maintaining, and a cat named after a character in a Penelope Fitzgerald novel. My parents and I talk every few weeks. My father asks about the books in a way that is still a little clumsy, but is genuine. My mother finished my 3rd novel in 4 days and called me on a Sunday and talked for 2 hours. She told me she was proud. She said it simply, the way my father had said, "I'm proud of you" in that card, without ceremony, without making it bigger than it was. I believed her. Patrick and I are cordial. We have arrived at a kind of adulthood truce. We are not close. We do not have the kind of relationship I might have wanted once, but we are kind to each other. He read my first book. He texted me to say it was good. I believe he meant it. Cindy came to my 3rd book's launch event in Chicago. She drove up from Rockford, stood in the back of the bookstore with her arms crossed, waited until the signing line was done, and then came up and stood in front of me and said, "I didn't know you could do this." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry I didn't know." I looked at her for a moment. She looked like our mother. She always has. "It's okay," I said, and I signed her book. She hugged me on the way out. We haven't talked much since, but the hug was real. I know what a real hug feels like by now. I know the difference. Professor Hartley has been retired for 3 years. We have lunch once a year, always at that same restaurant near campus, always a bottle of something I still don't entirely recognize. He is writing a memoir. I am reading the drafts. At lunch last fall, he pushed his glasses up on his forehead and looked at me across the white tablecloth and said, "You know, when you came into my seminar all those years ago, you had this look. Like you were waiting for someone to tell you it was real. Was it that obvious?" I asked. "To me," he said, "not to anyone who wasn't looking." I thought about that all the way home. About the years of not being looked at. About the front row. About the difference between those two things and what it cost and what it gave. Here is what I want you to carry from this story. Not as a lesson, because I distrust stories that turn into lessons, but as a thing I have found to be true in my own life, and that I offer to you in case it is useful. The people who don't show up, the ones who should be there and aren't, the ones who say, "We'll see," and then don't come. The ones who say, "That's nice," and put your 8 pages on the counter, they will not be the ones who define what your work means. They can't. That's not how meaning gets made. Meaning gets made by the one person in the front row who printed the program. It gets made in every sentence you write when no one is watching. It gets made in the moment you walk into that auditorium anyway, alone, in the heat, in the borrowed gown, and find your seat and wait for your name to be called. Your name will be called. I don't know when. I don't know in what room, or in front of what audience, or by what measure the world uses for the particular thing you are building. But the work is real if you make it real. The seat in the front row exists for every person who earns it, who does the work, who keeps going on the days when keeping going is the only thing between them and giving up entirely. You've been carrying something, I don't know what it is. But if you've listened to this whole story, if you've sat with me through all of it, I think you might know what I mean when I say, the front row is waiting. Go do the work that puts you there.
My name
That's
is
all
Veronica.
I've got. That's
I was
everything.
26 years old when I found out my sister had been living as me, and 31 when the people who were supposed to protect me finally believed it. I don't tell this story often, not the whole thing. Most people get a piece of it, the dramatic piece, the part that sounds like something from a movie, and they react the way people react to movie things. Wide eyes, a hand over the mouth. Oh my God, that's insane. And then they move on because it's not their life and they don't have to carry it home with them. But the whole story is different. The whole story is longer and slower and a lot less cinematic. It starts in a house in Akron, Ohio, in a room I shared with my sister Delia until I was 12 and she was 14. In a family that had very clear ideas about which one of us was going to amount to something. Spoiler, it wasn't supposed to be me. Before I go on, I want to ask you something. Where are you right now? Are you at home, maybe in bed with the lights low, or sitting somewhere quiet with your phone? I always wonder about the people on the other side of this. And I want to ask you something else. Have you ever had someone in your life, someone close, someone who was supposed to love you, who used you so quietly and so completely that by the time you understood what was happening, you'd already handed over years of yourself without realizing it? Because that's what this is about, not just the crime. The years before the crime, when I didn't even know there was one being committed. If this channel has ever made you feel a little less alone in something you've carried, please subscribe. It means more than I can explain. Drop something in the comments too, even just a few words. I read them, I really do. Okay, let me start at the beginning. The house on Mercer Street was small in the way that made everything feel louder. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. A kitchen where the linoleum had a soft spot near the refrigerator that my mother had been meaning to fix since before I was born. My father worked at a parts distributor, and my mother worked at the front desk of a dental office. And together, they made just enough to make it clear there wasn't much room for extras. Delia was the extra. I don't mean that cruelly. I mean it exactly as plainly as it sounds. My sister was the one in this family who got the extras. The figure skating lessons at 11. The new winter coat every year instead of every other year. The bedroom with the window that faced the backyard and got afternoon light, while mine faced the side of the Pattersons' fence and stayed gray until almost noon. I used to think that was just how it worked. Older kids got more. That was the rule. That made sense. It took me a while to understand it wasn't about age. Delia was beautiful, in a way that our parents treated like an achievement of their own. Pale and long-limbed, with our mother's dark hair and our father's green eyes, the combination that everyone said was striking. She knew it by the time she was 10. She knew it the way some kids know they're fast or funny, not with arrogance exactly, but with a kind of comfort in her own skin that I spent most of my childhood watching from a distance and not quite understanding. I was small, brown-eyed like nobody else in the family, a throwback to some grandmother I'd never met. I wore glasses from second grade on, round ones that fogged up when I came in from the cold. And I read constantly, not to show off, but because books were the thing I was good at in a house where being good at reading didn't earn you anything. The birthday that I come back to most often, and I come back to it more than I probably should, was my 10th. My mother had made a cake. Yellow with chocolate frosting, which was my favorite, and I remember thinking when I came downstairs that morning that this was the year something felt different. There were balloons. Real balloons, the Mylar kind, not the cheap latex ones. I counted 4 of them tied to the back of my chair. Delia got up from the table when I came in, walked over, and gave me a hug. She was 12. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo she'd been using that whole year. "Happy birthday, Ronnie," she said, and she meant it, I think. I think she genuinely meant it. My parents sang. We ate cake. My father gave me a card with a $20 bill in it, which was more than I'd expected. And my mother gave me a book I'd mentioned once, months before, that I didn't think she'd remembered. And then Delia opened her backpack and pulled out a small box, wrapped in silver paper with a white bow, and set it in front of me. "I got you something," she said. Inside was a bracelet. Thin gold chain, tiny star charm. The kind of thing you'd see in a store window and stop to look at. I put it on immediately. I wore it every day for 3 years. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand something about Delia before I tell you what Delia did. She wasn't a monster from the beginning. She wasn't calculating at 10, at 12, at 15. She was a girl who got too much of one thing and not enough of another. And somewhere along the way, she learned that the rules that applied to everyone else didn't quite apply to her. And instead of questioning that, she got comfortable in it. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. Not that she did what she did, but that she did it so easily, like it made perfect sense, like she didn't even have to think about it. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was 23. I'd been out of Akron for 5 years by then. I'd left at 18 on a partial scholarship to a state school in Columbus, studied accounting, graduated in 4 years with a 3.7 GPA, and a job offer from a mid-size firm downtown. Not glamorous. Not the kind of thing that made people lean forward at dinner parties, but mine. Completely, entirely mine. Delia had done 2 years at a community college, dropped out, worked a string of jobs, retail, a nail salon. A brief and apparently disastrous stint answering phones at a law office, and moved back in with my parents at 22. She was, by all accounts, fine, not struggling exactly, just kind of floating. I was in my apartment in Columbus when I got the first strange phone call, a woman from a collections agency. Polite but firm. She was calling about a credit card balance, $4,200, past due by 90 days, opened in my name, with my social security number, at an address in Akron I'd never lived at. I told her there had to be a mistake. She read me the account details. My name, my social, my date of birth. I remember exactly where I was standing, by the kitchen window. I'd been making coffee. The coffee maker was still running, that little hiss and drip, and I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, and I felt something go very still inside me. Not panic, not yet, just stillness. Like before something arrives, I called the credit card company, then I pulled my credit report, and that's when I found the others, 3 credit cards, a store account. A personal loan for $8,000 that had gone to collections 8 months earlier. All opened in my name, all at that same Akron address, all within the past 2 years. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Mom," I said, Has anyone been using my information, my social security number? A pause, just slightly too long. What do you mean? I mean someone has opened 5 accounts in my name. Credit cards, a loan, I have collection calls. My credit score is, I looked it up this morning, Mom. It's 511. Another pause. I'm sure it's some kind of mix-up, she said. These things happen. Identity theft happens all the time, Veronica. You probably need to call the credit bureaus. I know I need to call the credit bureaus. I'm asking if you know anything about this. Why would I know anything about this? And here's the thing. Here's the part that I keep coming back to. She didn't ask me if I was okay. She didn't say, "Oh my God, that's awful." She didn't react the way a mother reacts when her daughter calls with a crisis. She just redirected. "I have to start dinner," she said. "Call the bureaus, they'll sort it out." I stood in my kitchen for a long time after I hung up. The coffee had finished brewing. The apartment was quiet. I had this feeling, not quite a thought yet, more like a shape in the air in front of me that I already knew, that some part of me had already put it together. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. Are you still with me? I know this is a lot. Stay with me because what I found out next, it took me 2 years to fully understand the scope of it, and I'm going to tell you all of it. I filed a police report. That was the first step. And the officer who took my statement, a tired-looking man named Sergeant Willis who smelled like coffee and had a broken pen he kept clicking, was kind but not especially optimistic. "These cases are hard to prosecute," he said, clicking the pen, "especially when the suspect is a family member." I hadn't said it was a family member. "What makes you think it's a family member?" I asked. He looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity. "It usually is," he said. "I went home to Akron that weekend." I told myself it was to look my parents in the eye when I asked them. The truth is I went home because some part of me was still hoping I was wrong. Delia was there when I arrived. She was in the living room watching television, her legs folded under her on the couch, wearing a sweatshirt I recognized as one of my mother's. She looked up when I came in and smiled, easy, natural, like nothing was different. "Hey, Ronnie, didn't know you were coming." "Just for the day," I said, and I watched her. That's all I did that afternoon. I watched her. The way she talked to my parents, comfortable, a little demanding, the way the beloved child is always a little demanding without even knowing it. The way my mother brought her tea without being asked. The way my father changed the channel to something Delia liked without any negotiation. At dinner I asked, as casually as I could manage, whether Delia had my social security number. My father looked at me. "Why would she have your social security number?" "I don't know, Dad." "That's what I'm asking." Delia didn't react, that's the part. She kept eating. She had this, I don't know how to describe it, this practiced stillness. Like she'd been in this conversation before, or one very much like it, and she knew exactly how to sit inside it without flinching. "I told you," my mother said. "Identity theft. It's probably someone who got your information from a data breach. It happens." 5 accounts, I said, over 2 years. All using the same Akron address. "Veronica," my mother's voice had gone flat. "Stop." I looked at my father. He was looking at his plate. I drove back to Columbus that night instead of staying over like I'd planned. The highway was mostly empty. At some point it started raining. That fine, cold drizzle that's barely rain but fogs everything up, and I drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. I didn't cry. I saved it for the apartment. I always save it for the apartment. The investigation took 14 months. 14 months of calls with the FTC, with credit bureaus, with 2 different detectives. First the one in Akron, then a second one in a fraud unit who actually seemed to care. 14 months of disputing accounts and filing affidavits and sending certified letters and being told to be patient, to wait, that these things take time. In that 14 months, I also figured out the full picture. It wasn't just the credit cards. Delia had used my name and social to rent an apartment, not the Akron address from the accounts, a different one, a nicer one, in a suburb called Fairlawn where the rents were higher. She'd lived there for almost a year before getting evicted, leaving behind $6,200 in unpaid rent and damages that went to collections under my name. She'd opened a cell phone account, a utilities account. She'd applied for a car loan. That one had been denied, thank God. And she'd applied for a job at a financial services company using my educational credentials, my degree, my GPA. She hadn't gotten that job, but she'd applied. That's the one I couldn't stop thinking about, not the credit cards, not the apartment, the job application. Because that one wasn't about money in the same way. That one was about, I don't know, something else, something harder to name. Like she looked at my life and thought, I'll take that. That looks easier than building my own. I found out about the job application from the fraud detective, a woman named Karen Albrecht, who had short gray hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and who was, to this day, one of the most straightforwardly decent people I have ever dealt with in a professional context. She called me on a Tuesday morning, and I remember I was at my desk at work, and I had to ask a colleague to cover for me while I took the call in the stairwell. "Veronica," she said, "I want to walk you through what we've found, and I want you to be prepared because the scope is larger than what we initially thought." She laid it out systematically. The accounts, the apartment, the utilities, the phone, and then the job application. "She applied as you," Karen said. "Used your resume, your degree, your references." She changed the contact information to a number she controlled. I was quiet for a moment. "How long?" I asked. "How long has this been going on?" Karen paused. "Based on the earliest account we've been able to trace, roughly 4 years. 4 years. I was sitting on the concrete steps in the stairwell of my office building. The door above me had a small window with wire mesh in the glass. I stared at that mesh the whole time Karen was talking. I counted the little squares. I still don't know why I did that. "Veronica," Karen said, "are you there?" "I'm here," I said. "I'm here." Have you ever been handed information that should have shocked you and instead it just settled? Like it found the shape that had already been waiting for it? That's what that felt like. Not surprise. Wait. The charges came down 8 weeks later. 6 counts of identity theft, 2 counts of fraud, 1 count of criminal impersonation. Delia was arrested on a Wednesday. My mother called me that same night. I let it ring. She called again the next morning, and the morning after that. On the 4th day, I answered. "You did this," she said, the moment I picked up. No hello, no nothing. Just, "You did this to her." I sat with that for a second. "She did this to me," I said, "for 4 years. She's your sister. I know who she is. Veronica, she needed help. She was struggling." If I had just what, Mom? Silence. If I had just let her use my name, use my credit. "Apply for jobs as me? That's not, you're twisting it." "I'm reading you the charges," I said. "I have them right here." She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. There was a plant on my windowsill, a small pothos I'd bought the month before, when I was feeling hopeful about something I couldn't quite name. I looked at it. The leaves were doing fine. I keep coming back to that plant. I don't know why. I bought it in October and it was alive in November when everything was at its worst, and somehow that mattered. My father called 2 days later. His voice was different, quieter, less certain. He asked me how I was. First time he'd asked me that in, I think, genuinely years. "I'm okay, Dad," I said. "I didn't know," he said. "I want you to know that. I didn't know how far it had gone." And I believe him, I do. I think my father is a man who spent his whole life not looking too carefully at the things that would have required him to act. And that is its own kind of failure, but it's a quieter one. I believe that when the full picture was finally in front of him, he was genuinely surprised. My mother was not surprised. That's what I understood then, and what I have become more certain of since. My mother knew. Not the specifics, maybe not every account, not the job application. But she knew something was wrong, and she decided that protecting Delia from the consequences was worth what it cost me. That is a thought I had to sit with for a very long time before I could put it down. The trial was not what I expected. I want to say it was dramatic. I want to say there was a moment where everything crystallized and I felt something enormous. But it was mostly administrative. Documents, testimony. A courtroom that smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. Delia in a gray blazer she'd clearly borrowed from someone, sitting at the defendant's table with her hands folded, not looking at me. I testified for 40 minutes. Karen had coached me well, just the facts, answer what's asked, no editorializing. I kept my voice steady. I had practiced keeping my voice steady. At one point, I looked at Delia. She was looking at her hands. I noticed, and I know this is a strange thing to notice, that her nail polish was chipped. Not all of it, just the left thumb and the index finger on her right hand. Pink polish, mostly intact, flaking at the corners. I don't know why that's what I saw, but I saw it. She was convicted on 4 of the 6 counts. Sentenced to 18 months, suspended to probation with mandatory restitution, $31,400, the total of what had been documented. She served no jail time. I won't pretend that didn't sting. Karen called me when the sentence came down. I know it's not what you were hoping for, she said. It's something, I said, and I meant it. It was something. It was more than the nothing I had lived with for 4 years without knowing. I know what you might be thinking right now. I've thought it myself, that the sentence wasn't enough. That probation and restitution don't equal 4 years of someone quietly dismantling your financial life. And you're right, they don't. But here's the thing about justice, and this is the thing I've had to learn slowly in the years since. It almost never feels like what you imagined it would. It doesn't land like a thunderclap. It lands like the end of a long, exhausting task. Like putting something heavy down and discovering that your arms are still tired from carrying it. The restitution payments started 6 months after sentencing. Delia sent them through a court-administered payment processor. $63 a month for the first year. I know, because I looked it up, that at that rate it would take her nearly 40 years to pay the full amount. I never thought about the money much, actually. The money was almost beside the point. What I spent the next 2 years doing was rebuilding my credit. That's the unglamorous part, the part nobody mentions. Secured credit cards, careful, methodical payments. Letters to creditors explaining the situation, submitting court documents, waiting for the disputes to process. My credit score at its lowest had been 511. 2 years later, it was 724. A year after that, 781. I bought my first home at 29. A small house in a quiet neighborhood in Columbus, 2 bedrooms, a yard with a fence that needed painting. The closing was on a Thursday in March. My colleague Renata came with me. She'd walked through the whole credit rebuilding with me, helped me understand things I'd never been taught. Sat with me at her kitchen table while I organized documents into folders. She was 42, had 3 kids, and had 0 patience for injustice in any form. "You did this," she said, standing in the empty living room after the keys were handed over. "I know," I said. I bought that fence new paint that weekend. I painted it myself, a Saturday in April, and I remember the smell of it, that sharp chemical smell mixing with the cold air, and thinking, I'm here. I actually got here. My mother called that spring. The first call in almost 2 years. Her voice was different. Smaller. She asked if we could talk. I thought about it for a week before I called her back. What she said, when we finally talked, was not an apology, not a real one. It was something more like an explanation. She'd been scared. She'd made mistakes. She hadn't known what to do. She said, "I love you," twice. Both times it landed the way things land when they arrive too late. "I know you do, Mom," I said. "I believe you. Then can we?" "I don't know yet," I said. "I'm not there yet." And that was honest. That was the most honest thing I could give her. My father and I talk on the phone every few weeks now. Short calls, mostly. How's the house? How's work? Did I see the game? Easy things. He sent me a card on my birthday last year. Inside, he'd written in his careful block print, "Proud of you, always was." It's on my refrigerator. I'm not sure I believe the always. But I believe the now. And that's enough for where we are. Delia and I haven't spoken since the trial. I don't say that with anger. I say it the way you describe a road that's been closed, not in bitterness, just as a fact of the geography. She lives in Akron still, from what I understand. I don't follow her life. I don't need to. There's something I've thought about a lot in the past few years, something I keep turning over and not quite resolving. The bracelet she gave me for my 10th birthday. The gold chain with the star charm. I wore it for 3 years. I lost it sometime in college, not dramatically, just lost it, the way you lose things when you move around a lot. I used to feel bad about losing it. I used to wish I'd been more careful. I don't wish that anymore. I think some things are meant to be worn for a while and then let go of. That's not a lesson. That's just how it ended up. And that's okay. I am 31 years old. I own a house with a freshly painted fence. I have a job I'm good at, and a credit score that makes loan officers actually smile at me. I have Renata, who calls me on hard days without being asked, and I have a handful of other people who have seen me at my worst and chosen to stay. I have a pothos on the windowsill of my new house. Different one than before, but same kind. The leaves are doing fine. What I want to say to you, and this is the part I think about the most carefully when I tell this story, is not what you might expect. I don't want to tell you to trust no one. That's not what I learned. I don't want to tell you that blood means nothing. That's not what I learned either. What I learned is something quieter. Something harder to say in a way that doesn't sound like a greeting card, but I'm going to try. There are people in this world who will look at your life, at the thing you built, the quiet thing you built when no one was watching, and they will decide, for reasons you'll probably never fully understand, that it should have been theirs. That they deserved it more, or needed it more, or that somehow the universe made an error by giving it to you instead of them. And they'll reach for it. And some of them will succeed for a while. Some of them will take things from you that you'll spend years getting back. Your credit, your name, your sense of what's safe. But here's what I know now, standing on the other side of it. They can't take the part that built the thing in the first place. That part, the part that gets up early, that teaches itself. That files the paperwork and disputes the accounts and keeps going on the days when keeping going feels like the dumbest possible choice. That part is yours. It has always been yours. Nobody else can use it, no matter whose name they put on the application. I spent 4 years being stolen from without knowing it. Then I spent 2 years fighting my way back. And then one Thursday morning in March, I stood in an empty living room with a set of keys in my hand and understood that the sum of everything that had been taken from me and everything I had built in spite of it was me. Just me, right there, exactly where I was supposed to be. I hope wherever you are right now, in your bed, on your couch, in whatever quiet corner you found to listen to this, I hope you're getting there too. If you're not there yet, keep going. That's all. That's really all there is to it. Keep going.